Welcome to Harder Than It Looks, Parking Uncovered, a podcast that illuminates real solutions to common problems within the parking industry. I'm your host, Brian Wolff, CEO of Parker Technology, and in each episode, I'll introduce you to real parking pros that will bring their own tips, tricks, and best practices to manage what we all know is harder than it looks, parking a car. On the show today, we have Kenzie Coulson, parking and mobility consultant at Walker Consultants. Kenzie has 25 years of experience providing parking, transportation, and mobility solutions for a wide variety of clients. In addition to managing and consulting on project-based work today, she has immense experience as an operations manager with demonstrated success in overhauling parking programs. She's quite famous for it, actually. Of note, Kenzie launched paid parking for Park City Municipal, which was and I remember this, a highly emotional TDM-based project. On the private side, she recently revamped City Creek Parking Campus, the City Creek Parking Campus in Salt Lake City, 13,000 spaces, which involved parks equipment for 160 lanes, which she got installed in 6 months, electrical network upgrades, revised permitting, new event plans. We're going to talk about all this. Elimination of cash collection, new mobile payment options, all kinds of other stuff. Currently, Kenzie manages projects for Walker Consultants and often supports municipalities and private campuses with strategic operational planning and right-sized technologies. Today, we're going to touch on a couple of different things, including strategic planning how-tos, defining success in parking environments, and leadership versus management. It's going to be a great topic. Kenzie, welcome to Harder Than It Looks.
Thank you for having me.
This is going to be a great show. So when I think about the grassroots of Harder Than It Looks and coming and bringing to light the tips and tricks of running a great parking operation, your name is going to float to the top of probably being exposed to many of all of the pitfalls of trying to introduce parking to something and then trying to cajole city leaders into helping you get it done. I can remember when you were doing that project in Park City, you were up to your ears in alligators for sure. So go ahead. Yeah. We're going to get into that in just in a little bit. What I like to do with my guests is I like to hand them the mic, tell them to go back as far as they want to go, and tell us all the choices you made and the steps you took to get to obviously where you are today with Walker. So the mic is yours. Go back as far as you want to go and just tell us Kenzie Coulson's story.
Kenzie Coulson probably didn't have a lot of ambition for a career necessarily when I was a youngster. I just wanted to do things. I wanted to go places. I studied abroad a few times in college. I got the opportunity to go to Southeast Alaska for a job, and it started by summer. I got to work on boats. It evolved into a controller HR position at the Wilderness Lodge based in Glacier Bay. And I knew nothing about the world. I was just having fun. Alaska's beautiful. I got to kayak camp. I got to see the glaciers. But as a controller there, I often would do other duties as assigned. And one day, my bosses were out fishing, and they were not watching the kids or the lodge or anything else. And I was the only one there when one of our bus drivers drove into a ditch. And so I did an incident report. I got everyone relocated. I enlisted the help of a crane operator. I got the bus out of the ditch and brought it back. And finally, my bosses show up and they said, "So you just been hanging out?" And I'm like, "Actually, we had a bus in the ditch." And they said, "What? You just took care of it?" And almost immediately after that, I was promoted to operations manager. And so I was 20 years old. I didn't know anything about being a manager or a leader or doing anything with 100-person staff. I knew nothing, but fell into that and loved it. I loved the team environment. I loved the people and was immediately successful because I did sincerely care about the team. I wanted to be a part of success for everybody. And so in terms of, if you ask me then about leadership or management, I'd be like, whatever. I don't know, whatever, Brian. It's crazy. I'm just here. I'm just doing this. And now, after so many years, I look back at some of my training, some of my teams, and I can see why I was successful without even knowing the levers to pull. I just really cared. and people want to feel cared for. They do their best work when people in leadership and management positions are sincere. And so anyway, that led to more operational management. I managed a small terminal for FedEx when I was quite young. And then I moved on to other transportation related endeavors. I managed parking and transportation and logistics for the Sundance Film Festival. And I worked on a tech startup. And then I worked for Park City Municipal as a parking and fleet manager. I also managed some transit there and launched some electric buses, done some consulting, lots of project-based work, and then most recently managed the City Creek operation, which was a great overhaul, really exciting, especially from the technology side of things.
Yeah. Okay. So did you get out of Alaska with FedEx?
We actually managed the concession for the Glacier Bay Lodge, and there was transition, and Aramark took over the concession. We knew that was happening for maybe 1 or 2 years before it actually happened. So it was not a surprise that they were going to lay everyone off and start fresh. But at that time, I said to myself, I'm just going to go to Utah. I'm going to put all my things in my car. I'm going to go work for Sundance. Sundance clearly needs someone like me. And I had no problem confidence-wise then, or maybe now. I just felt like I'm going to go down to Utah, see what it's like, do a little snowboarding, hang out, and work in transportation. And sure enough, that's what happened. I worked for Sundance. I had a wonderful experience with them. That's the most collaborative team I've ever joined. And I like to think about it now and strive for some of the experience with my teams.
Okay. So then you might be one of the only people that I've ever talked to on the podcast where it sounds like transportation was part of it. It was in your stream of consciousness and it didn't involve a little ad in the newspaper. So where did that come from?
I'm not sure, but I do know that when I was at Glacier Bay Lodge and I had a fleet of vehicles and we had transportation challenges every single day, I was attracted to those challenges. And one thing about the parking industry is that there is infinite challenge everywhere you look. And even the best operations out there have challenge and opportunity. And so I think it's fun it's like problem solving all day long.
Yeah.
So,
and troubleshooting. And so I'm going to put a pin in the leadership piece and the management piece because I do want to circle back. I've got a couple threads I want to pull on, but let's stick just for a second with the 2 projects that you did. So at Park City, tell us about a little bit about that journey of them deciding they wanted to go paid parking and then actually trying to execute it, because it sounded like, at least when you were in the middle of it, you had constituents that did not agree and were not happy about it. And you were still the person at the tip of the spear driving what actually happened. So tell us about that and the fact that you lived to tell the story afterwards.
I survived, and I like to think about many of the successes of the project, but what happened is the city council read Donald Shoup's book, and they were, for a moment in time, unified that we have to launch more paid parking. We have to get control over some of our congestion and our demand issues. And I was semi-recruited. It was a public process, so there were other candidates, but I was encouraged to apply. And one of the folks at the city said, "Hey, we heard you could do this. We heard you could launch a paid parking program." And my first response was like, "Are you kidding me? I'm not going to be your scapegoat for that. No way."
Yeah.
And then I went home and then I thought about it. And then I realized, like, maybe this is where I belong. I should be doing projects that contain a certain element of a risk that maybe other people aren't willing to jump into. And so I did it. I got right into the center of things. I used my voice thinking that I could help educate the public. And while the council wanted a project, it was the business owners, it was a lot of folks in town who were really worried about it. And it becomes so emotional and people are like, "You're going to ruin our small town. How dare you?" And I did more engagement than you can even imagine. I met people individually. I did focus groups, community, open houses, went on the radio 20 times. We had newspaper stories, we had one sheets, we went door to door, everything you can imagine. And at the time, if you asked me, I know I would have said, look, this matters and we're doing something valuable. This is best practice. This is how we create sustainable communities. Are you kidding? This is what we have to do. And at the same time, I was marrying that message with one of, hey, I know it's emotional and I live here and I know that this feels hard, but also what's the alternative if we do nothing? And when I think about it now, there were so many obstacles and so many people who are mean, and ultimately even people who worked with this in the city theoretically with me were not necessarily helping me. And that feels so terrible when it's like that.
Yeah.
But I'm very proud of the project. I like to also think about it in context that we didn't get to launch every single thing that was in the plan that we dreamed about, but we did maybe make 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, and that's still forward.
Yes. Yeah.
So
is it stable? Is that parking program stable at this point?
stable. It's not as dynamic as was designed. And for a moment in time, we even had an employee shuttle where employees parked off site, which was magical. It was so beautiful.
Okay. All right. So then how did you get to City Creek?
City Creek called me also. They said, hey, we heard you could work some magic. And it was a similar scenario where I said, what exactly do you need? And in this case, they knew they needed new parks. They knew that they were a premier operation, but also needed some operational overhaul. A lot of paper process and cash collection and kind of old school things were happening in the operations. So when I joined their team, I knew I was coming in to do the overhaul and assess the operation in the existing conditions and then figure out how to transition it. And I felt like this is really fun. I've got license to do some things, and maybe with less of a political tone and fewer obstacles. And sure enough, it was like that. But we did, of course, have obstacles, and you always do.
Yeah, you always do. So I have a couple of themes that I'm going to pull out of here. First, I'll key on a phrase that you said that I love, because when you said, what's the alternative? So everybody is fearful of what's coming. So you're going to kill the downtown area. I remember Mitch, I cannot remember Mitch's last name. He ran parking for Aspen. He talked of similar challenges where you're just going to have to trust me. If we turn these meters over, it's going to be good for your business. But people are fearful of the forward. But if you're like, if we just stay right where we are, it's just as miserable where we are here. And so let's go. Let's try it. Let's try an experiment. Let's at least take a step towards making it better for everyone, including the employees have some place to park. The residents have to have some place to park, and you want patrons in and out to be able to find a parking spot. And those are 3 difficult constituents to take care of.
And it's not intuitive. I think right now I'm working on a few projects for the launch of paid parking, and elected officials are maybe fearful of the pushback they're going to receive. And so that plays into this whole dynamic. But it's also hard to think about, hey, we're enlisting controls in order to provide service. This service plus compliance plus enforcement is really hard for people to understand. So I get that on one hand, and on the other hand, it's demonstrated best practice. Why do most communities do these things? It's because it creates success. And yeah, a lot of people just don't believe me at all. They'll say, what's the data on that? Oh, the data is everybody does it. And there are 12 factors in a parking program or more that matter. And that's also why I like it. You've got the compliance and the enforcement and the technology and the integrations and the maintenance and the budgeting and the staffing, the behavior change, the customer service. It's infinite. And I like to think about an operation where you can adjust all these levels and create something beautiful, but it's not the same level for every operation.
Yeah. And in fact, I'm curious about that. You've got probably exposure now to private projects and public projects. Tell us a little bit about the difference between the two.
And sometimes a private project will move faster and more seamlessly toward a best practice tactic. and there's less hang up in what maybe a council member thinks is going to happen, or a business. Often the business owners in a community really dictate what happens. It's interesting to me that in public, a lot of municipalities think that they have a very collaborative environment. And my experience is actually, it's sometimes the opposite, that departments work in silos. And so there are these initiatives that come about through the council or the Transportation Commission, and they're floating here, and someone's supposed to do the project, and they know that that's their lane. But they often have a lot of time creating collaboration among the other departments. And so that can really hold things up, and it doesn't feel good either. But I think it's worth the battle. That's what I think. All these projects are meaningful, even if people don't care.
Yeah.
I think they're great.
Or if they think they can't see it, because again, they're removed. They are not parking experts, so they're fearful of lots of parking is counterintuitive. Any techniques for getting siloed people to collaborate? I'm listening very carefully.
I don't know if I have magic tricks on that one, but I do like to tell people in really open terms what's happening. And I think that sometimes we're afraid of pointing out people's differences or what's really happening. But being vulnerable is key. And so I've had a lot of experiences where I've been successful because I'm being transparent and sincere and saying, look, I don't know how to do better. Or I don't know the answers, or this is what I'm struggling with. And people often respond to that because it makes us human, and it creates trust, and it creates relationship. And then once you have relationship, people are more likely to be on your team. And I think that translates also to almost any leadership role.
Yeah.
I know they talk about vulnerability now more than they used to, but I'm a believer in it. I think it really.
I think it opens the door for input, because if you pretend you have all the answers, then nobody will come to you and nobody will approach you. If you say you don't have the answers, then it at least makes you a little bit approachable around being able to get input. I've always been focused, and it looks good from where I'm sitting, and I'm listening very carefully. Your comment about how these people thought they were great collaborators and they weren't such great collaborators. I'm like, I think my team's, they're all pretty good collaborators. And so I'm listening very carefully. But I guess my point is I've always tried to be open to the truth and allowed people to bring the truth to me, or at least say the truth to me, bring it to me. That sounds very king. I'm sorry. I don't want to make it sound king-like, but at least discovering what's really happening. And so this vulnerability piece, I wonder if you have any stories in particular about where you did do it and the things got better and the relationships helped smooth the path forward.
The story that comes to mind is once I had an employee, she worked in the office for several years and then was moving on to nursing school and having a career in a different vein. She left one day and said, I just want to thank you for all of our time together, and you've been so wonderful. And it was all kind of normal, conventional things that people might say when they leave a job. And then she goes, Kenzie, you're the only boss I've ever had who is not afraid to say, I don't know the answer. And I said, of course, being a boss, being a leader, being a manager has nothing to do with knowing the answers. Absolutely not. And why we think that in our culture is unfortunate, because it's actually really great when you have a moment with a team and you say, I don't know the answers, because what it does is open these doors to then being able to say, how do we figure it out? Let's figure it out together. Who wants to own this? Maybe it's a development opportunity for somebody in that moment to say, yep, I'm going to do some research and I'll bring it back. I love that. I think that it's just too bad that we maybe generally as a culture lack confidence or the foundation to be comfortable with not knowing things.
Yeah, I think we all project that the leaders have all the answers. And so then to hear somebody say that they don't have all the answers is probably first a little jarring. And then you're like, okay, but maybe they're human too. And I didn't figure it out. Okay, now let's shift to, and now I can understand why Walker wanted you, right? You have all kinds of great and very broad experience to be able to bring a body of evidence and a body of work to bear for all of the different projects that are trying to figure out parking. My question is, do you have like a framework for strategic planning when you go into these engagements? Is there a playbook that you like to run, or certain things that you like to do to try and understand what current state is?
I like to start by understanding the environment and also what the people say about the environment, because often they'll tell you the answers. They'll tell you their heartache. And so interviewing the teams and from every angle is really important. But additionally, I like this idea that we, again, choose our fate a little bit. We choose our success. And my latest thing, I guess, that I'm really fixated on is compartmentalization. And I like this idea that we decide our metrics, we decide how much we care. So, for example, every parking in the operation in the world, people are going to park badly. They're going to do the wrong thing. They're going to be mean. That always happens, every single place. The question is, how much do we care? How much do we care about compliance? How much do we care about certain complaints? Which complaints do we care about? Where do we want to focus? And where do we want to shove this negativity or these other ideas or here? And in my last operation, we had a lot of trouble with resident doing the wrong thing. And at some point, I tell the team, okay, we are not thinking about this anymore. We are wasting emotional energy. We need to put that over here. We need to focus on these things that we can better control. And I think it's really important to define these ideas. What are you going to worry about? And what are you going to not fixate on at that moment? Maybe you circle back. But it's, again, infinite opportunity, infinite buckets to think about. And
I love it because, again, you define, I'd say it again, you define the guardrails, or you define what you're going to tolerate and what you can ignore. And all of that comes out in the metrics. And that makes perfect sense to me as I'm thinking about our scorecard. I'm like, okay, clearly I care about revenue, and clearly I care about cash, and clearly I care about number of opportunities created. It can be the same for a parking operation. It's actually genuinely, I'm curious about your ability to manipulate the kinds of complaints that you get. What an interesting concept.
And the thing is, there's what happens with the working team, and there's what happens maybe with other political folks or executive leadership, perhaps. They may have different metrics and ideas about what's happening.
Yeah.
But I prefer to think about the people who are actually on the scene working. And how do we create a culture? And I'm not saying that political entities or that executive leaders can't be a part of that or can't understand it. I'm just saying the starting point should be on the ground level. How do your parking attendants feel? How do your customers feel? What happens in your office? Do people answer certain intercom calls and they're spinning from it because it was so negative? That's where I want to cut to, because we can't fixate on those things for sure, or we won't make it. It's incredibly negative work. And people, again, tremendously mean. We used to do some breathing exercises in our control center. And I think I've done a lot of yoga lately. And so maybe I'm projecting that people should do yoga and breathe with intention. But actually, yeah, I know. It sounds stupid, but actually, when someone tells you where to go on the intercom and you're just really trying to help them, there can be this emotional moment or a period that doesn't just pass.
So
those are the kind of areas where I like to focus on the operation, because it can change people's lives and perception of what they're doing.
Yeah, it resonates so strongly with me, particularly, so City Creek, or even, Park City maybe was a bigger operation, but City Creek, clearly a huge operation. And the work's got to get done. And yes, of course, the executives are important, but if you don't have staff that are happy, motivated, empowered, that operation grinds to a halt, or worse, it devolves into chaos. And candidly, one of the here's a little industry secret. One of the reasons that we feel so strongly about having our people answering calls together is that camaraderie and the sort of picking each other up aspect to being yelled at all day. You could picture somebody taking those calls from home and being roughed up all day and not having anybody to pick you up. It is a big aspect of Tammy and her operational team's esprit de corps around we got to be here to help these folks understand that was just one person who was really upset. It's not personal, and you got to keep going.
I agree. I think it's really smart. And in my last operation, I would often invite office people from HR or others, if they would come, sit at the intercoms for a while, see what happens. If you have any questions about what the customer service level is, come take a look, because often as in those environments, you know what the parker did. You pretty much know, do they have a permit? You pretty much see the camera view.
Yeah.
And it can be a real eye-opening experience for others to join and get a sense. And like you said, also, if you can pick people up or at least be there, so that not to laugh, although I will say we had a rule in our last operation. If you're going to laugh at the customer, you got to go hide first.
Yeah.
Very important. It's natural to laugh.
Yeah. And it's really hard not to give the energy back. We also spend a lot of time very early on talking about absorbing the energy, because they're not mad at you. They're just mad. And it's triggering people. When somebody yells at you, you want to yell back at them. And it is hard work to modulate. And so the same thing is, it's hard not to laugh at somebody who's struggling with something that, you know quite well. So you got to be sensitive. All right. In your job now, do you have a range? Do you have private and public projects?
I do. Yeah. I'm doing a wide variety of things for public and private, and some of it is more stakeholder engagement driven. Some of it is more technology driven, and I'm no technology expert, but I can be really scrappy and concise also with what we need to do as the mission, or what does the user really need. And so sometimes I'm marrying multiple service lines, but it's been a mix of projects, and I'm really enjoying it because I do have a lot of diverse experience where I think there are a lot of people who don't really know what I do for work. And I know some of my neighbors are like, "So you're a parking attendant?" And I don't know. It's a hard question. How do you really explain this kind of work? Because I do all kinds of things that might help a parking operation or a city. And sometimes I don't answer the question. We'll just say, "Yeah, I work in parking." And you know what? Parking attendants are wonderful, can be wonderful.
Yeah.
I've had some wonderful ones.
Yeah. I say that I'm in parking and I just wait for the reaction, because it's always a blank stare. I love the blank stare. They're like, what does that mean? You're a valet? No. Valet. Okay. So it's fun. All right. So on the project, I guess one of the lead-ins, or one of the threads I'm pulling on, is you've got all these different projects, right? And generally a project or a strategic plan is only as good as somebody's ability to drive to an implementation. Now, I would imagine sometimes they let you stay for the implementation. Sometimes they don't let you stay for the implementation as a consultant. But I'm wondering, what's best practice for getting all the way from strategic plan to implementation? Are there key things that somebody can do to make sure that whatever gets done, what gets decided up here, actually gets driven through to making it actually operational?
Yeah, I think that engagement probably is the cornerstone of success. And when I say that, sometimes we're talking about the community or the business owners or folks, developers, even people who are going to object and basically kill the project. But often the other key is the internal engagement plan.
Sure.
Who are the champions of the project? Does the city manager really want to touch this? Who are the fans? Who are the people who are going to stand up and say, no, this is the right thing? Who are the city departments who need to help? Are they engaged? Is someone telling them to be engaged? And so a lot of times those are the first questions that I'll ask in creating the roadmap toward implementation. And what I've come to peace with a little bit also is that sometimes things can't implement for whatever political reason or whatever staffing reason or whatever money reason maybe. But maybe that's okay. The younger me would be like, that's so stupid. We need to move forward. I can't even stand this. And now in my seasoned age, I'm like, maybe it's okay. The plan sits a little longer, but you know what? Let's think about glass half full. We have a plan. And in some way, the plan's been adopted, even if it's sitting on the shelf. And maybe our day is when the next mayor comes in, or maybe a little bit farther down the road. But I'm a little more at peace with that because I also know how volatile projects can get. And if you are city staff and you're trying to push forward, there's not a lot of incentive to put your rear on the line. What do you get out of that? A raise? No. Accolades? Probably not.
No.
Understanding? No, definitely not. I think I used to think I could educate more than I can, more than anyone can. It's just hard. But I think we've got to be positive. And that's another thing I think about a lot now is that syntax matters. Positive words matter. And I didn't used to talk like that, probably. I'd be like, this plan, no, this is stupid. We should move forward. You used to always say, this is stupid.
Yeah.
You probably still say it.
Yeah. But you frame it differently. Positivity, it does matter. And finding the key stakeholders that can help you push. And then I think this probably comes with age for all of us, or maybe it's experience. We'll call it experience, not age. Having patience. I am learning to be a patient person. And then take the wins when you can get the wins. Because sometimes the impatient young us wants the whole thing done, and then you want to move on. Okay, let's get it done and then move on. And just understanding take the wins. Okay.
Yeah. That reminds me also of something in my last big implementation. I spent a lot of time changing our timelines and reassessing where we were with the project and what the new hierarchy of goals might be or how it was evolving as the project went. And in the end, I started to think, oh yeah, we are also trained to think this is the Gantt chart and this is the timeline and we are on the timeline and the timeline equals success. You know what? Let's reinvent the timeline based on whatever factors. And that's a way better process for creating success.
Yeah. It takes some of the pressure off of the people that actually have to do the work too, I would imagine. They're under pressure, particularly if you're driving to a Gantt chart and they're like, slow down. So I'm still trying to absorb what you just gave me. So that's good. All right. That sort of bleeds into the leadership versus management. And so this will be a tricky question. It could be a little obscure. How do you define success around a successful parking project? What does success look like?
I think success is probably circumstantial based on the actual operation and the goals.
Yeah.
And per what we were just talking about, sometimes success looks like get the equipment in the ground. And in my last large implementation, that was the top of the hierarchy of goals, I like to say. Must get equipment in ground, must tweak it and refine it later. And there was a timeline pinch, and it had to do with the holiday season coming and sheer logistics. But I think sometimes the goal can be survival, and it's okay for it to be something broad like that. We want to survive and feel good and have our jobs and still keep rolling forward. Sometimes it's more granular, but I really like this idea of we define these things.
Yeah. We define them. Yeah, I like it. I like the new definition of success is that we define it, getting input from everybody, allowing people to collaborate. So that sort of leads into leadership versus management, because you could probably dictate that people collaborate. But I think we'd all agree that leading people to collaborate is probably a better way to do it. So to help us, give me your perspective on differentiating between management and leadership and how you did it. I have some ideas. We're gonna go back to Anchorage. Was it Anchorage?
Glacier Bay. Yeah.
It was Glacier Bay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Alaska. That'll expose my ignorance of Alaska, sadly. Sorry.
I think that for leadership, what we're talking about is I prefer a servant coaching mix with maybe a rebel edge.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But for me, the idea is about empowering the people around me and creating a foundation for collaboration and being clear about goals and being caring and vulnerable and sincere and creating those levels of trust. Because when people are trusting and understanding of their lane and what they're doing and what the true initiatives are, that's when the magic happens. And so I think there's a lot of talk about, I'm a leader. Oh, I want my company to be this. Okay, but how do your people actually feel when they come to work?
Yeah.
And often there's a big difference between those two things. And also often, unfortunately, I think that our culture and our trend in the economy is to maybe cut some of the middle meat out of a lot of operations where maybe some of those middle managers were bridging the ideas from above to the parking attendant on the street. So I think that's a sad trend. But
Yeah, the middle is going away and in favor of technology that then inevitably doesn't always work. And it's people that people have to save it. My observation of you, first of all, is you're not slow to jump in to get in the mix. And so leaders who have dirt under their fingernails always, there's definitely people respond to that for sure. We'd already talked a little bit about saying you don't know and asking for input because we don't have all the answers. And then you just talked about empowerment. So I'd like a story around empowerment because I've always, a small company, you can do everything. As the company gets bigger, it's clear you can't. As a leader, you set the tone for how things get done or you set standards, but then ultimately you've got to hand it off to people and empower them to get their jobs done. So tell us a story about empowerment.
I spent a lot of time on my last operation thinking, how do we create the toolkit for that empowerment? How do we get some of these managers to think about this bigger picture? And I don't know that I have any secret answers on this, but I spent a lot of time talking about meeting with them, but talking about the idea behind whatever complaint we just received or whatever was maybe on the docket, whatever staffing issue, whatever. We talk about the idea of that and how does this minuscule thing that just happened in the operation correlate to a higher level goal of what we want to be and how we want to feel, and this idea of, again, what is your culture actually like for the people working there?
Yeah.
And so I think it takes time to give people that ability to empower. If you just say, I want you to be empowered and you just go out there and do it, I don't know that people know what to do with that. Those are just words. And so by giving that idea more of a storyline, and so for an example, I would bring the managers into my office often if we would get a complaint or something would happen. I wouldn't bury it. I'd say, let's talk about what just occurred here. What does this mean to us? And again, are we compartmentalizing this or are we going to pick this apart? Is there something we can think about in the technologies? Is there a configuration? Is there a different way we can do training? And open the questioning for collaboration, but also using these moments as an example of how do you, in the future, think? How do you ask questions and be empowered to run? And I think that stuff's contagious. So it takes time, though.
Yeah, I like the deconstruction piece. So let's just pick it apart and let's not be judgmental about it. But tying it to the bigger purpose, you were over here, I think also gives that goes back to giving them North Star around what we're trying to get done. So this is the bigger picture. Bigger picture is this is a revenue generating operation. We've got commitments to a larger organization. Here's how we have to fulfill it. Or we've got a customer driven organization and that didn't feel customer friendly for these reasons. And the sort of cutting to what's the bigger purpose. And then back to what you said very early is like just picking what we're going to pay attention to and other things that we can just ignore because it's less important. It's a lower priority. I thought that was really good. Okay. All kinds of pearls. So how do you mentor or guide others to step into leadership in parking? What are the key exposures? And we've talked probably about a couple of them, but what are the key exposures?
Well, it's a good question because I don't know that it's always the same in operations and with certain personalities, but A certain coworker of mine comes to mind immediately where he was really well versed in all the workings of the operation, knew the technologies perfectly, even could do some of the electrical upgrades himself, could do minor IT tasks, was aware of every element of the workings. But in that case, maybe didn't understand the politics as well. And so I think you'll find moments where folks need to develop toward that, or toward understanding, how do I even survive in the more political, what happens when we've been mandated to do something that isn't best practice. A lot of people are flubbed on that, including me. I think that's you want to watch me say, I don't know something. That's probably every time when I'm told to do something that is absolutely 100% not best practice. It's, well, this is a brain buster. So I don't know what the answer is, but I do think everybody has a chance to develop in different ways. And I think about myself a lot too, where I've learned to be softer, and I've learned to maybe think more carefully about my words. And what's interesting about that is that in some of my projects, I think maybe I've been too soft. Maybe I need to go into some of these meetings and actually say, no, that's not best practice, and say mean. Maybe we get more action. I don't know.
You again. So anybody listening to this, particularly somebody, if we've got people on the front lines or some people in the middle, what I can see the wheels turning, because we all reach that point where you're trying to lead people. You're trying to be soft, or you're trying to be encouraging. And then there's that moment where you're like, okay, am I too soft here? Do I need to lay down the gauntlet? And all that is illuminating that all of the self-doubt and all of the critics in our own heads are alive and well. And it circles back to, I don't have all the answers. What I do know is that sometimes you got to be hard. Sometimes you got to be soft. And sometimes you're just not quite sure. And it doesn't matter what level you are.
I think the main thing though is we mentioned it, but I've been blessed with strong confidence. I've always had that. I don't feel very shy, and I don't have fear when I'm in a project as much. I like the element of risk. And I think that if there's one thing that people should think about, it's try to be confident, try to not have fear as you're moving towards some of these things, because it's not constructive. It just does not help at all.
Yeah.
And if you're doing that and you're also thinking about how to define your success and how to compartmentalize certain things that you can't control as well, I think that's just a tactic for controlling the negative environments.
That's good. All right. Let's move on to what we call the lightning round. And so we ask the same 6 questions of our podcast listeners. So if you've listened to the podcast, you might have a heads up on what's coming. So the first question I have for lightning round, is there a phrase that you're known for? And so in other words, if somebody utters it somewhere else in the organization or in other organizations, they're like, oh, that is a Kenzie Coulson original.
Oh, I think there probably are. That's a tough one. I think we hit on some though. The younger me would have said, that's so stupid. Why are we doing this? I would have gone right to that. The older me, I'm all about compartmentalization. We've talked about that too. I've already said it probably a dozen times, but I love it because otherwise, I don't know how we stay sane.
Yeah, I have to admit, I can hear Kenzie, the young Kenzie, saying, that's so stupid.
Yeah.
So
I've been accused of being negative before. I don't know.
It's a hard thing to turn around. Okay. All right. So that's good. Stupid and compartmentalization. Got it. The younger version and the more mature version. Got it. All right. What's the hardest thing you've ever done in life?
In life, I struggle with worrying about my children. And what's interesting to me is that I'm a project manager. I'm a task master. Having younger kids was easier for me. I have 3 kids. And when they were little, I can see you, I can control you, I can do certain things to make sure that you're eating and you're getting exercise and you're getting outside, and I'll put you in these sports because I'm developing you. But I felt like I can control more. Even if I wasn't, I felt like I was.
Yeah.
And now they're 20 years old and 18 and 14, and they're wanting to push me away and make their own choices. And oh man, I worry about them. And I know they're good kids and they're going to make good choices, but I am surprised at how much I worry.
Yeah. I don't think that ever ends. All right. That's a hard thing. You'll have a lot of people nodding their heads when you say that out loud. Okay. So now what's the hardest part of your parking job today?
Part of the parking job, I think, is probably digesting the negative. I think that we see it everywhere. And while I'm maybe partially removed as a consultant now, I feel a lot of empathy for some of these people. And we also see a wide range of people making certain actions based on what their operation dictates or their politics dictate. So you've got the guy on the far end of the spectrum who is just trying to CYA, trying to make sure that he's got some backup to whatever he needs to do and have someone in his court. And you have people who use us to say the words that it's better if it comes out of my mouth versus theirs, for example.
Yeah.
And then you have people who really want advice. So I am less in the trenches with really being in the fire, but I do think a lot about these people with whom I work with, and I want success for them. Just even if we're on a project for a shorter time, I really feel strongly about that.
I could imagine also, as someone who comes into an operation and then you're talking to the different stakeholders, you can probably see freight trains coming from a lot further away than they can. And you have lots of empathy for the hidden landmines.
Yeah, and sometimes we think that the freight train's coming and there's maybe no way to stop it. It feels a little powerless.
Yeah.
So I don't know that any of this is easy, but again, for people who work in this industry, bless your heart. It's worth it. It's good. How do we become a sustainable, smart country without this kind of stuff? And maybe we have odds against us, but I think it's meaningful.
I think it goes back to what we talked about before. The alternative, our North Star in the United States is cars. We love cars. And so the faster we come to grips with the fact that if you have a car and it's going to leave your garage or your home, it's going to have to be parked somewhere. And so you should be nice to the people that park those cars because they are enabling you to drive your car. And it's linking these bigger concepts of if you don't want to deal with parking, you have to get rid of your car. Oh no, I'm not going to get rid of my car. I'm like, okay, then you should be nice to me because I'm helping you put your car in
The real mentality is that's my car and this is my land and this is my right. That stuff is really ingrained in our culture.
Yes, it is. And bless their hearts too.
Bless their hearts too. Yeah. See, I'm soft now that I'm.
All right. So now I'm going to put a magic wand in your hand and I'm going to give you the opportunity to fix anything you want in parking. You could even fix two things if you wanted to. What are you going to fix with a magic wand?
I think that if I could fix anything, I would want to fix the perception that parking is a bad word. And I'm even guilty of thinking about it that way. Probably 10 years ago, if you asked me what my jobs entail, I would say I work in transportation, even if I were standing in a parking lot at that moment. Transportation, logistics, transportation, technology. Those are safer words. And so I would change that perception that parking's not a bad word. And also we don't see good collaboration among the silos of entities who actually could create better patterns for us. For example, you have wonderful planners in some cases who are doing great carrot-driven mobility initiatives. But if those exist over here and no one's actually managing parking with all the things that we can do with technology and with appropriate staffing and with all these management techniques, then it's often less meaningful. And same thing, traffic engineers or other folks who control the infrastructure. If all these entities don't really understand how it all comes together or dismiss parking like it's not important. Usually when I go into these operations and I'm doing an existing conditions assessment, the first thing I'll say is you need to start managing some of your inventory in a different way and thinking about it differently. And people are like, what? We don't want to do that. I know you don't want to. And I know no one wants to be the poster child for it, but it's low hanging fruit. And I don't know, I've said before that I think parking is the hub of the wheel on a lot of different mobility and sustainability issues. No one embraces that. I can say that all day, but parking's still a bad word. Still misunderstood.
So that one or two executive or people that hear this and think to themselves and think the way you thought about Park City, where you're like, okay, maybe if I take a little risk and I actually get parking in the mix and we put the whole picture, we might actually be able to make magic happen because all those things have to work together. So I'm hoping that on someone's going to listen to podcast number 36 and say, that was when the light bulb went off and I matured and I changed my perspective. Is going to make your job that much easier the next time you go in and see them. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Okay. When you're not parking cars, what do you do for fun?
To do a lot of yoga these days. It's also a surprise because maybe I did a little yoga 5-7 years ago, but I didn't actually do what they told me. I didn't breathe like I was supposed to. But I'm a believer in it. It's intentional. It's about moving with intention, breathing with intention, and thinking about what you really need to do to stay focused and keep your mind clear. So I'm into that. I also like to ski and snowboard, trail run, mountain bike. I live in the mountains. So getting outside is a big part of our day.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. And what are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of my kids and my family. They're amazing. But also my past teams in the work environment are like family. And if you're listening to this, you guys know who you are. I can sometimes see people I worked with 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and it's not a day had passed because we really worked well together, and I'm grateful for that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I believe it. I have talked many times with other leaders about their coaching tree or their leadership tree. And I would imagine that your tree's pretty big and growing. So that's good. All right. So if someone listened to this, they got the religion, they wanted to get a hold of you, how would they go? How would they find you?
You can find me on the Walker Consultants website. I'm at kcoulson@walkerconsultants.com. And yeah, I love to talk about challenges. You're not alone out there if you're thinking about how to evolve your operation or what isn't going well. That's what I do all day. Think about those things. So
yeah,
I'd love to hear from you.
And bring a very wide body of knowledge to the conversation, at least. You've seen things that worked and probably things that didn't work and the circumstances that caused both of those conditions to be true. That would be a valuable conversation for sure. Okay. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you sharing your stories and your leadership philosophies, compartmentalization, and no longer saying it's stupid. It's being more positive. I love it, among obviously other things. But if listeners have gotten this far, then they got all of your wisdom. And I'm trying to summarize it in 3 sound bites, which is not very good. So thank you for joining us at Harder Than It Looks. And
yeah, I'll be at IPMI. So I look forward to that and connecting with all the other parking misfits, I'd like to say.
That's a wrap on this episode of Harder Than It Looks, Parking Uncovered, presented by Parker Technology. Please leave us a review if you liked what you heard. Make sure you tune in next month as we continue to uncover tips, tricks, and best practices to manage what we all know is harder than it looks, parking a car. Bye for now.